In 1979, Mossad quietly built a shipping company that, on the surface, looked like any other small European logistics firm. But behind the office doors and polished branding, it didn't actually ship anything for Israel. What it did do, however, was far more extraordinary. It had offices in 5 different countries, employed more than 40 staff members, most of whom had no idea they were part of an intelligence operation, and operated real cargo vessels that made routine stops at Iranian ports. For 12 years, this seemingly ordinary company transported weapons, smuggled in operatives, and gathered intelligence right under Iran's nose. And when the operation eventually collapsed, the method Mossad had used was so ingenious that intelligence agencies across the world quietly adopted versions of it. This is the hidden story of how a completely fabricated business became one of the most sophisticated front operations in modern espionage. How Mossad convinced the international shipping community that their fake company was completely legitimate. How they slipped into one of the most hostile countries in the Middle East again and again. And how a single miscalculation, something no one expected, brought the entire operation crashing down. Before we dive deep, make sure you stick with me till the end. Because the final twist is something even veteran intelligence officers still talk about. And if you're into these real covert stories, subscribe, because more unbelievable operations are coming. Now let's go back to 1979, the year everything changed inside Iran. For decades, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. He was aligned with the West, maintained strong ties with the US and Israel, and even allowed both countries to operate intelligence networks from within Tehran. Israel had a fully staffed intelligence station inside the city. Mossad officers traveled freely. Information flowed easily. It was for them one of the safest and easiest assignments in the region. Then came the Islamic Revolution. Ayatollah Khomeini rose to power. The Shah fled into exile. Overnight, the new government became aggressively anti-Israel and anti-American. Mossad's Tehran station was shut down immediately. Israeli diplomats were forced out. Agents had to flee within hours or face arrest and likely execution. In a single sweep, Israel lost all intelligence access to Iran. Sources disappeared. Networks evaporated. Every method of collecting information inside the country was gone. And this wasn't just a setback. It was a crisis. Iran was transforming into the most dangerous adversary Israel faced. The new regime was supporting Hezbollah, building long-range missiles, and possibly exploring nuclear ambitions. There were public calls for Israel's destruction. Without intelligence from inside Iran, Israel's entire strategic picture went dark. The challenge was brutal. How do you spy on a country that is actively hunting your agents? How do you place operatives where being linked to Israel means instant death? How do you gather intelligence from a nation now sealed off from your presence? Mossad needed a cover so natural, so routine, so unremarkable that no one, not even Iran's new intelligence service, Savama, would question it. They needed something that blended into everyday life, something vital to Iran's economy, something that would never appear suspicious. The idea that changed everything was deceptively simple. Create a shipping company. Ships are perfect tools for espionage. They move between countries constantly. They dock at industrial zones, naval ports, and commercial terminals, places full of military and economic secrets. They employ multinational crews, making diversity on board seem standard. They carry containers full of cargo, meaning secret compartments or disguised equipment attract no attention. Every country, hostile or not, needs shipping companies. Even a regime that distrusts the world still requires imports and exports. If Mossad built a shipping company that appeared completely legitimate, they could bring vessels into Iranian ports repeatedly without raising suspicion. But there was a massive challenge. You can't just create a fake company and expect a hostile government to trust it. Savama would investigate every detail. They would check ownership, financial history, licensing, cargo patterns, anything that might connect the company back to Israel. So Mossad made a decision that defined the entire operation. Don't create a fake company. Create a real company that secretly works for Mossad. In late 1979, as chaos erupted in Iran, a team of Mossad planners began designing what would become one of the most complex front businesses in espionage history. They knew the company couldn't be based in Israel. That would be too obvious, and the United States was also too closely tied to Israel politically. They needed a neutral, respected maritime nation, somewhere that raised zero suspicion. They chose Denmark and the Netherlands. Both countries had world-class shipping industries. Both had major ports that handled international cargo every day. And crucially, both were viewed as neutral nations by Iran. Using these countries gave the new company instant legitimacy. The company was given a cover name. For safety reasons, because the real name is still partially classified, we'll call it Maritime Solutions. Maritime Solutions was officially registered in Copenhagen in 1980. On paper, it was owned by a Danish investment group. Real people, real backgrounds, real maritime experience. But behind the scenes, every dollar that launched the company came from Mossad. The funding trail was hidden behind an elaborate financial maze. Israeli intelligence funds, Luxembourg Bank, Panama Holding Company, Swiss Investment Fund, Danish investors, Maritime Solutions. This technique is called layering, a method so complex that even skilled investigators struggle to trace the original source. Nothing linked back to Israel. Every transfer appeared legal. Every company involved looked authentic. But building the company was only the beginning. To look real, it had to function like a real business. So Mossad hired genuinely qualified employees. Maritime Solutions posted job openings for logistics managers, accountants, shipping coordinators, and port agents. People applied. They interviewed. They were hired. And they performed the daily work of running a shipping company, completely unaware they were part of an intelligence operation. Most employees were in the dark. They filled forms, coordinated cargo, negotiated contracts, and built relationships with clients. Only the CEO and a handful of senior staff, each either Mossad officers or long-term assets, knew the truth. This structure made the company bulletproof. When Iranian intelligence examined Maritime Solutions, they found exactly what they expected. Real staff, real offices, real business, real taxes, real ships. Yes, Mossad bought actual cargo vessels. They acquired 3 older cargo ships on the second-hand market. Not brand new or flashy. Those attract questions. Older ships were cheaper, ordinary, and perfect for a small company starting out. These vessels were registered under Maritime Solutions, received proper maritime certifications, passed inspections, and began real commercial routes. And once they were operational, the door into Iran quietly opened. Quietly, they hired crews, real sailors from different European countries, men who signed contracts believing They were simply joining a new commercial shipping company. None of them knew that 2 or 3 crew members on every ship weren't sailors at all. They were Mossad officers planted deep inside the operation. These officers never took obvious roles. They weren't captains or chief navigators. Instead, they blended into positions like communications officer, mechanical engineer, or cargo supervisor, roles that allowed them access to the ship's internal systems and the freedom to install surveillance devices without raising even the slightest suspicion. These embedded officers weren't Israeli citizens on paper. Mossad built entire fictional lives for them, European passports, forged educational histories, fabricated childhood addresses, and even fake families. If any government tried to investigate them, every detail would appear perfectly legitimate. Now Maritime Solutions had all the ingredients: a real company, real people, real ships, and the credibility to start sailing. But one key requirement remained: the company had to be profitable. Nothing attracts suspicion faster than a struggling business with no logical funding source. If Maritime Solutions wasn't making money, Iran's intelligence service, Savama, would immediately question why the company stayed afloat. So Mossad made sure the company actually operated like a top-tier shipping business. Maritime Solutions began bidding on real transport contracts across Europe and the Middle East. They moved everything from construction machinery to packaged goods to industrial supplies. They had competitive rates, responded quickly, and delivered reliably. Mossad had pumped resources into the operation, giving Maritime Solutions the ability to operate smoothly. Fuel, repairs, port fees, everything handled with professional efficiency. Within 2 years, the company wasn't just stable, it was profitable. It had regular clients, expanding networks, and a growing reputation. The brilliance of the operation became clear. Mossad no longer needed to fund it. Middle Eastern companies, including Iranian clients, were literally paying for their own surveillance, but the real prize was Iran. And in 1982, Maritime Solutions made its first docking at an Iranian port. This was one of the riskiest phases of the entire operation. Iran, after the revolution, had become extremely suspicious of foreign influence. Savama investigated every international company that tried to operate in their ports. They scrutinized ownership records, checked financial histories, and tracked any sign of Western or Israeli involvement. But Mossad had anticipated this. After 2 full years of legitimate, flawless operations across multiple countries, Maritime Solutions had built a clean, documented reputation. They had invoices, tax filings, contracts, and satisfied clients. Every detail looked exactly the way a real shipping company should. Iran approved them to dock at Bandar Abbas, one of the busiest ports on the Persian Gulf. Their first shipment? Completely normal. Construction equipment being delivered to an Iranian company. Nothing suspicious. Mossad wanted this first trip to look painfully ordinary. But beneath the surface, the embedded Mossad officers were already at work. They took covert photos of port facilities. They noted the positions of Iranian naval ships. They observed guard rotations, customs workflows, and docking procedures. They mapped the entire layout, quietly documenting vulnerabilities. All of their information was stored with hidden cameras and encrypted transmitters disguised inside the ship's communication hardware. Once the ship returned to Copenhagen, the intelligence data was extracted and sent straight to Tel Aviv. The first mission was a complete success. Iran saw a normal shipping company. Mossad saw a newly opened gateway. In the months that followed, Maritime Solutions performed more deliveries into Iranian ports. Each visit revealed more insights. Crew members learned the port's rhythm, when security was relaxed, when inspections were rushed, when customs officers took breaks. Relationships began to form between sailors and Iranian port workers. This is when Mossad started thinking bigger. One embedded officer, let's call him David, began building a friendship with an Iranian port supervisor at Bandar Abbas. This supervisor managed cargo inspections, gave clearances, and interacted daily with customs offices. David presented himself as a Danish crewman, just another sailor who visited Iran often and liked the culture. He brought harmless gifts, chocolates, cigarettes, European coffee. He never pushed too hard. Trust takes time, and Mossad understood this better than anyone. After 6 months, their friendship looked natural. They drank tea together. They shared small stories about family and work. Eventually, David offered small amounts of money, not as a bribe, but framed as a thank you for making the docking process smooth. At first, the supervisor refused, but over time, he accepted. A few $100s here, a few hundred there. Enough to make life easier, not enough to arouse suspicion. Now the supervisor was compromised. Without even realizing it, he didn't know he was helping Mossad. But by accepting money from a foreign company, he had unintentionally given Israel leverage. Once that happened, the real operation began. David started requesting small favors. Can we expedite this inspection? Can you pre-clear this container? Can we skip the manual check on this one? Nothing unusual, nothing extreme, just practical favors that shipping companies often request to avoid delays. The supervisor agreed. Why wouldn't he? It made the process faster, and he was already pocketing extra income. And that's how Mossad began smuggling equipment into Iran. Some cargo containers carried more than the paperwork suggested. Hidden compartments stored surveillance devices, encrypted radios, cameras, and occasionally weapons meant for Iranian opposition networks. Customs inspectors would still check them, but quickly, carelessly, because the supervisor had already approved them. This system worked flawlessly. Every shipment brought more equipment. Bit by bit, Mossad was constructing an intelligence infrastructure inside Iran. But the most powerful part wasn't the equipment, it was human intelligence. Maritime Solutions became the perfect channel for inserting agents. Here's how. The company would hire a new crew member, a Mossad officer, or an asset from the Iranian diaspora. Their European identity was watertight. Passport, employment history, bank accounts, even fake relatives if needed. When the ship docked, the agent would simply walk off the ship like any other sailor. They could visit suppliers, shops, or local contacts. Iran didn't monitor foreign crew members who came ashore for short visits. Once inside the city, the agent would meet pre-arranged contacts, sources Israel had recruited before the revolution or through third countries. They exchanged intelligence, delivered funds, gave equipment, received reports, and passed instructions. Then the agent would casually return to the ship before departure. And just like that, they sailed out, undetected. Mossad had created a silent, efficient pipeline that allowed them to send people into Iran and pull intelligence out, all under the cover of normal commercial shipping. No radios, no risky dead drops, no covert border crossings. Just a shipping company that looked exactly like every other shipping company. Ships came and went. Crew members walked on and off without attracting attention. Nobody questioned it. By 1985, Maritime Solutions was making consistent runs to 3 major Iranian ports. The company had expanded its routes into Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar, moves that strengthened its commercial legitimacy and made it appear like a normal shipping firm growing its business footprint. At this point, over 40 employees were on the payroll across Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Hamburg. Most of them still had no idea they were part of one of Mossad's most ambitious intelligence fronts. The entire operation had become a smooth, efficient machine, gathering intelligence, moving equipment, and even turning a profit. But Mossad wanted more than surveillance at ports. They wanted access to Iran's military, industrial, and research facilities, places far from the coastline. And to reach those areas, they needed a different strategy. That's when they came up with a bold, almost audacious plan. Maritime Solutions would expand beyond shipping and become a full logistics partner for Iranian companies. They began offering complete supply chain packages, sourcing goods from European suppliers, handling transport, arranging warehousing, and navigating customs procedures. For Iranian companies isolated by sanctions, these services were extremely valuable. Several major Iranian firms signed contracts with Maritime Solutions. Those contracts became the key. As part of the agreements, representatives from Maritime Solutions were invited to visit Iranian factories to assess needs and oversee deliveries. These representatives were Mossad officers with impeccable covers. They entered Iran legally with business visas. They toured facilities, asked detailed questions, took notes, and photographed equipment. Everything looked like normal corporate due diligence. But behind the scenes, every moment was intelligence gathering. One especially important mission involved a chemical plant outside Tehran. Maritime Solutions had secured a contract to provide specialized industrial chemicals. Under that pretext, they sent a technical advisor, a Mossad officer with a background in chemical engineering. Over 3 days, he toured the entire facility. What he uncovered was alarming. The plant was producing dual-use chemicals, materials that could be used for legitimate industry but also for chemical weapons programs. His report gave Israeli and American analysts a clearer picture of Iran's chemical weapons capability and contributed to international pressure that later forced Iran to join the Chemical Weapons Convention. All of it began with a simple business contract. By 1988, Maritime Solutions had been running for 8 years. It was one of Mossad's most successful long-term operations. They had gathered extensive intelligence on Iranian ports, military installations, industrial capabilities, and supply chains. They'd built networks of sources, smuggled in equipment, and supported dissident groups, all without Iran realizing it was happening. But size creates risk. As the company grew, maintaining operational security became more difficult. Remember, most employees believed they worked for a normal Danish shipping company. But some began noticing strange inconsistencies. Why were certain containers never opened during inspections? Why did some crew members join voyages for only a trip or two and then disappear? Why did the company sometimes take contracts that weren't financially logical? Why did senior executives avoid discussing certain operations? These questions weren't asked out of suspicion, mostly simple workplace curiosity. But in intelligence work, curiosity is dangerous. Mossad couldn't simply fire employees who asked questions. That would attract even more attention. Instead, they offered plausible corporate explanations. Crew members left for better opportunities. Special containers were pre-cleared because the company paid for expedited processing. Unprofitable contracts were investments in new markets. Most employees were satisfied. A few remained quietly doubtful. Then in 1990, the threat became real. One crew member, not Mossad, just an ordinary Dutch sailor, had been working for Maritime Solutions for 3 years. A competent, loyal employee with a spotless record. But he started dating a woman in Amsterdam who worked as a reporter for a Dutch newspaper. And casual conversations between partners can become dangerous. He mentioned some of the unusual things he'd seen. Sealed cargo containers that no one was allowed to open, crew members who seemed to have military discipline, high-tech communications gear aboard an aging cargo ship, long, unexplained delays in Iranian ports. His girlfriend wasn't thinking espionage. She thought it sounded like smuggling or sanctions violations. Something that might be a good investigative piece. She began digging. She looked into Maritime Solutions public records. She checked company registrations. She tried to trace the ownership structure. What she found was odd. Too many holding companies, too many offshore entities, too many gaps. Mossad's internal security unit detected someone researching the company. They monitored digital activity and found the journalist's queries. Suddenly, alarms went off. If a journalist published even a speculative article hinting at unusual company behavior, Iranian intelligence would immediately investigate. They wouldn't need proof, just suspicion. That would be enough for them to tighten port security, inspect containers thoroughly, interrogate crew members, and monitor business visitors. The entire operation, built over a decade, would collapse overnight. Mossad had only 2 choices. Option 1, silence the journalist. They could intimidate her, manipulate her, bribe her, or feed her misinformation. But any misstep could create a scandal in Europe, drawing even more attention. Option 2, shut down the operation before any story went public. Shutting down was safer. An intelligence operation is only successful as long as it stays invisible. The moment a reporter started asking questions, the risk became unacceptable. Maritime Solutions had served its purpose. It was time to disappear it. Quietly, cleanly, without leaving a trace that could link it back to Israel. Operations in espionage always have an expiration date. Maritime Solutions had already survived far longer than anyone expected. 11 years of running undercover operations in one of the world's most dangerous environments was practically unheard of. The intelligence Mossad had collected was invaluable, but everyone inside the agency knew the truth. No front operation lasts forever. Eventually, something cracks. A coincidence, a question, a mistake, or simply time. In late 1990, Mossad made the difficult decision to shut Maritime Solutions down, not because it had failed, but because it had succeeded for so long that continuing the operation had become a liability. And the most important rule of deep cover work is simple: end the mission before the mission ends you. But they couldn't just switch off the company overnight. Closing operations suddenly would draw exactly the kind of attention they needed to avoid. A mysterious shutdown would scream something was wrong, and Iranian intelligence would start pulling every thread. Even innocent employees might start talking, and talk is dangerous. So Mossad engineered a controlled collapse. They slowly introduced a series of financial problems. Maritime Solutions began taking on contracts that were deliberately unprofitable. Accounting inconsistencies were quietly created. Payments to suppliers began arriving late. Slowly, almost elegantly, the company started to look like it was simply mismanaged. Over 6 months, the decline accelerated. Creditors demanded money. The company sold assets to cover debts. Ships were offloaded and purchased by other companies. Offices reduced staff and eventually shut down completely. By mid-1991, The company had died a completely ordinary corporate death. No explosions, no scandal, no exposure, just another small business that went bankrupt and disappeared. The perfect exit. The employees who lost their jobs chalked it up to unfortunate business decisions. They moved on. None of them ever discovered that they had been unknowingly working for Israeli intelligence for years. To them, it was just a job, a paycheck. A company that failed. Iranian businesses that worked with Maritime Solutions were disappointed, but nothing about the closure suggested espionage. If Iranian intelligence did investigate the bankruptcy, and they almost certainly did, they found exactly what Mossad wanted them to find: a company that tried to expand too fast, took too many risks, and collapsed. Nothing more. But behind that ordinary facade was one of the most successful and daring intelligence campaigns Israel had ever executed. In just over a decade, Maritime Solutions had mapped Iran's ports, studied its naval operations, and gathered extraordinary insight into its industrial and military capabilities. They inserted dozens of agents. They built networks. They smuggled equipment. They penetrated places Israel had no right to reach. The operation shaped Israeli decision-making for years. It revealed Iran's support networks for Hezbollah and other militant groups. It helped Israel track Iran's growing missile capabilities. It provided clues, early clues, about Iran's eventual nuclear ambitions. And all of it was done using a front company that actually generated profit. For 11 years, Iran and other Middle Eastern clients unknowingly funded an intelligence operation being run against them. In intelligence terms, there is no cleaner win than that. But success doesn't mean safety. Anyone who has worked in espionage knows the truth. The longer a cover runs, the greater the risk. At any moment, someone in the Iranian government could have asked the wrong question. A customs inspector might have opened the wrong container. A port supervisor might have realized he was being manipulated. A false document might have been examined too closely. The Mossad officers embedded in the operation were living on a knife's edge. Every voyage into an Iranian port could have been the last. Every handshake, every inspection, every conversation carried the possibility of detection. The courage required to maintain deep cover for years at a time is something most people can't even imagine. And yet the agents kept going. Because intelligence work isn't about glory. It's not about headlines. It's about preventing threats before they become catastrophes. And in hostile nations where discovery means death, the stakes are brutally real. And here's the thing. Maritime Solutions wasn't unique. Not even close. Intelligence agencies all over the world, the CIA, the Russians, the Chinese, all run front companies. Some are small shell corporations. Others are massive businesses with hundreds of employees. Some have already been exposed. Others remain invisible, quietly collecting intelligence as we speak. Many of those companies employ real people who have no idea they're working for a spy network. They go to work, they file paperwork, they manage shipments or software or consulting projects. They think they're part of a normal company. And they are, except for the handful of deeply embedded operatives steering everything from the shadows. Maritime Solutions became a model. Intelligence agencies studied every detail of how Mossad created it, operated it, and shut it down without leaving fingerprints. It became a masterclass in how to blend legitimate business with espionage so seamlessly that the two become indistinguishable. But even the most flawless operations can end because of something trivial, something human. In this case, not because Mossad slipped, but because a single Dutch sailor casually mentioned strange details to his girlfriend, who happened to be a journalist. A tiny coincidence that almost unraveled years of work. And that's where we pick up the final chapter. Operations like this were never meant to last forever. Maritime Solutions had been running for more than a decade, far longer than most deep cover intelligence fronts survive. The intelligence gathered through those years was priceless. But Mossad knew the truth. Every covert structure eventually cracks. The smartest move was to end the operation quietly, on their own terms, before something forced the truth into the light. So in late 1990, Mossad made the decision to slowly dismantle Maritime Solutions. But they couldn't simply shut the doors one morning. That would immediately trigger suspicion. Iran, European regulators, journalists, everyone would start asking questions. And questions were the last thing Mossad needed. Instead, they engineered a controlled collapse. The first step was simple: introduce financial stress. Maritime Solutions began taking on several contracts that were designed to lose money. They took shipments that made no sense for a profitable company. They accepted deals that barely covered operating costs. They deliberately created accounting inconsistencies that made the company appear unstable. Suppliers started noticing late payments. Partners began complaining. Maritime Solutions slowly, steadily, looked like a company sinking under its own weight. Over the next 6 months, the illusion grew stronger. The company struggled with liquidity. Ships were quietly sold to cover debts. Office locations in Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Hamburg shut down one by one. Employees were laid off. Creditors filed claims. Shipping logs reduced to a trickle. By mid-1991, Maritime Solutions looked like just another small European firm crushed by bad financial decisions. A failed business, nothing more. Employees who lost their jobs walked away, believing the company simply collapsed like thousands of others. Most never knew they had spent years working inside one of Mossad's most sophisticated front operations. Iranian businesses who had partnered with Maritime Solutions were disappointed but unsurprised. Companies come and go. They quickly moved on and found other logistics providers. Iranian intelligence almost certainly investigated the bankruptcy. But what they found was exactly what Mossad had prepared: a failing company, not an exposed spy network. Nothing on paper connected Maritime Solutions to Mossad. No suspicious money trail, no evidence of intelligence activity. It was a clean exit, and just like that, one of the most audacious espionage operations in modern history vanished without a trace. Yet its impact was enormous. In its 11-year lifespan, Maritime Solutions collected highly sensitive intelligence on Iran's maritime security, port infrastructure, industrial capabilities, and naval deployments. They built long-term covert networks inside Iran. They inserted agents directly into the country without raising suspicion. They maintained direct contact with Iranian opposition groups. They even gathered intelligence that later influenced Israeli and American diplomatic strategies. They also provided insights into Iran's missile development, chemical weapons potential, and early nuclear ambitions, years before these programs became known globally, and all of this was done while Iran had absolutely no idea it was happening. But the part almost nobody talks about is the risk, the extraordinary, constant, suffocating risk. For the Mossad officers embedded as sailors on those ships, every day inside an Iranian port was a gamble. One wrong question from a suspicious guard. One unexpected inspection. One mistake with a forged identity. One compromised Iranian contact. And the entire team could have been arrested. Or worse. Every meeting with a compromised port official could have been a trap. Every delivery to a warehouse could have been a sting. Every shipment containing hidden compartments could have triggered catastrophic consequences. For 11 years, the people running this operation lived in the shadow of disaster. But they kept going because this is what intelligence work demands, taking calculated high-stakes risks in hostile territory to uncover the truth. And Maritime Solutions wasn't unique. Dozens of intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, FSB, MSS, DGSE, have used front companies just like this. Some were exposed, many weren't. There are companies operating right now somewhere in the world that look completely legitimate, but exist solely as intelligence platforms. They hire real employees, they earn real profits, they maintain real clients. Yet their true mission is buried under layers of corporate structure. That's what made Maritime Solutions so effective. It blended espionage with authentic commercial activity so seamlessly that even professionals struggled to spot the difference. And the most shocking part, how impossible these operations are to detect. If a front company truly operates like a real business, if it makes money, if its employees genuinely believe their work is legitimate, then it becomes nearly indistinguishable from an actual company, unless someone makes a mistake, unless someone talks too much, unless coincidence pulls a loose thread. And with Maritime Solutions, that loose thread was a Dutch sailor dating a journalist, an accidental connection that almost unraveled everything. But even that wasn't enough to expose the truth. Mossad shut down the company before any damage could occur. Most of what we know today came from leaks, memoirs of former operatives, and documents declassified years later. Huge parts of the operation remain secret. The real company name, the identities of the embedded officers, the exact intelligence collected, the Iranian sources who risked everything, and the operations that spun off from Maritime Solutions after it ended. Because that's the nature of intelligence history. You learn about the successes from decades ago, but you never know what's happening right now. The world of business and the world of espionage overlap far more than anyone realizes. The lines are blurred, the masks are convincing, and the truth is almost always hidden in plain sight. And Maritime Solutions stands as one of the clearest examples of that, a shipping company that never really was just a shipping company.